Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going straight into the work of Aldous Huxley, specifically the doors of perception and also heaven and hell. You sent these our way because you're fascinated by how our perception really shapes our reality,
Right.
and what possibilities altered states of consciousness might, reveal.
Exactly. And our mission today is sort of to unpack Huxley's own mescaline experiences, but also his bigger thoughts on consciousness, art, the human condition, all that stuff.
Yeah, and for you, our listener, if you're looking to get your head around complex ideas fairly quickly but really thoroughly and have those aha moments.
Huxley's fantastic for that. He really is. He just has this way of putting really deep ideas about perception into words that feel, well, significant, but also surprisingly easy to connect with.
It's so interesting from the get-go because Huxley himself, he said he had a pessima imagination, like a really poor visual imagination.
Yeah, really weak.
So the fact that he then takes mescaline and has these incredibly vivid experiences, encountering a reality just so different from his normal inner world, well, it really sets the stage for some deep insights, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, so where does he start? He kicks things off by looking at some of the biochemistry behind it all.
Right.
It had been noticed, a few years before he wrote this, that mescaline and adrenaline, which our own bodies produce, actually have a very similar chemical structure.
Okay.
And then later, researchers found links between LSD, that powerful stuff from ergot fungus, and these same kinds of compounds. Basically, scientists were finding these chemical family resemblances.
And that hinted at maybe a biological basis for these altered mental states.
Pretty much, yeah. And then it gets even more interesting.
With adrenochrome.
Exactly. They discovered adrenochrome, which is basically a breakdown product of adrenaline, can actually produce a lot of the same effects you get with mescaline.
Now the kicker is, adrenochrome happens naturally inside us.
That's the key thing. So Huxley raises this really provocative question. Could things like, say, schizophrenia be linked somehow to biochemical imbalances?
Triggered by stress, maybe?
Yeah.
Affecting the adrenal glands?
That's the idea he floats. Now, he's careful. He says, when he was writing, this was plausible, something worth exploring, but definitely not proven. Still, it's a really compelling way to think about the biology of our mental life.
Absolutely. That mind-body connection, it's intricate. Okay, let's dive into Huxley's own experience with mescaline, he tells us, because of that weak visual imagination.
Right. He wasn't expecting some big, spectacular inner light show or anything.
But what actually happened was quite different.
Yeah, about half an hour in, he noticed this, slow dance of golden lights. Then these amazing red surfaces started appearing, sort of swelling out from these bright, energetic points, vibrating with this shifting geometric life.
And with his eyes closed.
He saw these complex gray shapes with pale blue spheres that became intensely solid, and then they just sort of floated up and vanished.
But, and this is crucial, he points out there were no faces, no figures, no landscapes.
No story, no symbols, nothing like that.
Right. The change wasn't in, typical hallucinations inside his head. It was out there in what he saw with his eyes open. The big shift was in perceiving what he calls objective facts differently.
And his reaction was so, Huxley, someone asked if it was pleasant, and he just said, neither agreeable nor disagreeable. It just is.
It just is.
Yeah.
That leads him to Istigkeit, doesn't it? That Meister Eckhart term.
Yeah, the isness or quality of being. He contrasts it with Plato, where, being is this abstract thing, separate from the messy world of becoming. Huxley felt Plato missed something vital by not grasping the sheer reality of things as they are.
So a key takeaway right there. Even our senses aren't just passively recording. Our internal state, how our brain works, it shapes everything. His poor visual imagination actually highlights that.
Totally. Perception isn't just a window, it's also the processor.
He then describes seeing some flowers, just a few flowers in a vase, but they were shining with this inner light, just pulsing with meaning. And he realized what the rose, the iris, the carnation meant was simply what they were. This paradox of being fleeting, temporary, but also eternal life. Constant fading, but pure being at the same time.
Yeah, it's like seeing the divine source in the tiny details. He talks about perceiving this life force in them, this flow from one beauty to an even greater one meaning to a deeper one.
Words like grace and transfiguration just sprang into his mind, and suddenly he understood them.
He describes looking from the rose to the carnation to the iris and having this direct, full grasp of the beatific vision. Satchitananda.
Being consciousness bliss.
Not just as concepts, but as a lived reality.
And this clicks something else for him, right? Something he'd read by Suzuki, about a Zen koan.
Yeah, the famous one. What is the Dharma body of the Buddha? Basically, what's the ultimate reality?
And the master's answer is just the hedge at the bottom of the garden.
Which sounds completely nuts. Then the student asks, okay, and the person who gets this, what is he? And the master just hits him and says, a lion with a golden mane.
Huxley said when he first read it, it was total gibberish to him.
But now, on Mescaline.
Perfectly clear. Obvious as 2 + 2 = 4. Of course, the Dharma body was the hedge, and it was also the flowers. It was anything or rather, the non-self he'd become looked at.
That shift to the non-self is critical.
And he looks over at the books on the shelves.
And same thing, glowing.
Exactly. More vivid colors, deeper meaning. Red books like rubies, green like emeralds, white jade, agate, aquamarine, yellow topaz. And the blue ones, the lapis lazuli books, their color was so intense, so meaningful. It felt like they were about to jump off the shelf at him.
Wow. It's like the inherent quality of things just turned way up.
Then his attention drifted to the furniture, a typewriter table, a wicker chair, a desk.
Just ordinary stuff.
But they form this complex pattern of lines. And what's interesting is he's not seeing them in terms of space, like how far apart they are. Instead, they just merge into this composition, almost like a cubist painting.
Like Braque or Juan Gris, he says. Recognizable but flat. No depth, no concern for realism.
He realizes he's not looking at them functionally like, I could sit there or I could type there. Not like a scientist either.
Just pure aesthetics. Forms and relationships.
Exactly. Pure aesthete mode. But then that shifts again.
Into something else.
Into what he calls a sacramental vision of reality. Back to how he saw the flowers. Everything shining with inner light, infinite significance. He focuses on the legs of the chair.
Just chair legs.
But they're miraculous.
Yeah.
Their tubular shape, their polished smoothness. Extraordinary.
Rather than just look at them.
No. He spends ages, feels like minutes or centuries actually being them. Or rather, being his non-self inside the non-self that was the chair.
That merging.
Yeah.
Losing the ego boundary. That's a really core part of the experience he's describing.
And that whole experience makes him think about consciousness itself. Which brings us to this big idea. The brain as a reducing valve.
Right, the reducing valve. Let's dig into that.
Okay, so the idea is, what? Our brain filters reality.
Pretty much. Think of the sheer immensity of possible consciousness, everything happening everywhere. Huxley suggests our brain and nervous system act like a filter or a valve, deliberately blocking most of it out.
Why?
Survival, basically. It lets through just a tiny trickle of information, the stuff that's useful for getting by on this particular planet.
And language. Language plays a big part in keeping that valve tight.
Hugely important, according to Huxley. Language, with all its symbols and built-in assumptions, basically confirms our belief that this narrow filtered consciousness is the only one that's real.
It makes us swap concepts for actual data, words for things.
Exactly. It kind of solidifies our view and makes it seem like the only possible view. So what we call this world is really just that limited slice of consciousness, petrified by language, you might say.
And those other worlds people sometimes glimpse.
They're elements of the total consciousness. The stuff that belongs to what he calls the integrated mind, but which usually gets filtered out.
So most of us only know what squeaks past the valve and gets the language stamp of approval.
Right. But some people, maybe they're born with it, maybe they develop it. They have like alternative tubing.
Bypassing the valve.
Temporarily or permanently. Could be spontaneous, could be through spiritual practice, hypnosis, or like Huxley found, drugs.
And what comes through isn't necessarily everything, but it's different. Beyond the usual practical stuff.
Exactly. It's perception beyond the utilitarian, beyond what the narrow individual mind thinks is the whole story.
Which brings us back to the mescaline experience itself.
Yeah.
One key effect he noticed was the ego gets weaker.
Yeah, the sense of I, the personal ego, it sort of recedes. It becomes less bothered about survival tasks, loses interest in space and time relationships, which are normally so crucial for, staying alive.
And as that happens, the filter gets less guarded, I guess.
Yeah. The integrated mind seeps through more. And all sorts of experiences emerge that are, from a purely biological standpoint, kind of useless.
Useless, but valuable in other ways. Aesthetically, spiritually.
Precisely. For some, it might feel like extrasensory perception. Others find this world of incredible visionary beauty. And for some, like Huxley in this instance, it reveals the sheer wonder and infinite value of existence before we slap concepts onto it, just raw experience.
He talks about reaching this state of obscure knowledge that the all is in everything, that the all is each thing.
Yeah, it's like the closest the limited, finite mind can get to perceiving everything that is happening everywhere in the universe. A glimpse of totality.
And the impact on the senses is huge, right? Colors.
Oh, massively. He says mescaline just ramps up all colors to this incredible intensity. You become aware of countless subtle shades you'd normally never notice.
He even contrasts it with the philosopher Locke.
Right. Locke thought primary qualities like mass and position were more real than secondary ones like color. But under mescaline, Huxley felt color seemed way more significant, more worthy of attention.
And he connects this to mystics.
He points out that mystics often report seeing these supernaturally bright colors, not just in their mind's eye, but out there in the world. And for some psychics or mediums, what mescaline users get briefly might be their everyday reality.
It's fascinating. So after thinking about the theory, he comes back to his own experience. Those chair legs again.
Yeah, like Wordsworth's daffodils, they held so much insight for him, this new understanding of the nature of things, but also a deeper appreciation for art.
That quote is amazing. A rose is a rose is a rose, but those chair legs were Michelangelo and all angels. The ordinary becoming extraordinary.
Exactly. And then later, as the effects are wearing off, he goes for a walk, ends up in a department store.
At random.
Yeah, and he finds these art books, picks up one on Van Gogh, and it opens right to the painting of a chair.
Van Gogh's chair.
Which he sees as this incredible portrait of the ding and sitch, the thing in itself, the pure essence of chairness.
And this encounter gets him thinking about art and this idea of esse, the fundamental being of things. He starts wondering, what kind of art did the great mystics appreciate? Like egg art, St. John of the Cross, William Locke.
Yeah, they even care about art.
That's his suspicion. He thinks maybe many of them didn't pay much attention or were happy with stuff we might consider second-rate. Because if your mind is already perceiving the all in everything,
then the specific quality of one particular painting might seem less important, right?
Yeah. Maybe art, he muses, is mainly for beginners on this path. Or for people who settle for symbols instead of the real deal. Descriptions instead of direct experience.
It's a provocative thought. So even our taste in art, our desires, maybe they have deeper roots in how we experience consciousness?
Could be. So he puts the Van Gogh book back, picks up one on Botticelli, flips through The Birth of Venus, Primavera. They never really did it for him. But then he lands on a less famous one, Judith. And boom, it grabs him. But not Judith herself.
Something else.
The drapery. The folds of fabric in her clothes and the maids.
The drapery. Okay, that seems specific.
Right. But he launches into this whole thing about the significance of drapery in art. He argues it's not just about tailoring. Artists love it for what it is, or rather what it represents.
Which is?
Abstract forms. When artists paint folds of cloth, they're essentially playing with pure, unconditioned shapes. Even in super realistic art, think about religious figures often. The actual face and hands are a small part. The rest is this amazing landscape of folded fabric.
Huh, never thought of it that way. So these abstract bits are just as important as the figure.
Maybe more so, Huxley suggests. They often set the mood, express the artist's whole attitude.
Can you give examples?
He does. Like the calm serenity in the smooth folds of Piero della Francesca. Or the huge, heroic, abstract swirls of fabric in Bernini's sculptures, contrasting with the faces. El Greco's drapery has this unsettling, almost physical yearning quality. Cosimo Turra's folds feel sharp, conveying the world's strangeness.
Wow.
And Watteau. His melancholy isn't in the faces, it's in the texture of the silk and satin. Tiny folds, wrinkles everywhere, like an inner uncertainty rendered in fabric.
So the artist chooses the subject, but their temperament, expressed through things like drapery, shapes how we feel it.
That's the idea. It dictates whether a party scene feels sad or a crucifixion feels peaceful.
Okay, so this intense perception, seeing the world like this, it must create challenges for just, living everyday life.
Totally. Huxley keeps thinking, this is how we should see. Looking at his trousers, the books, those chair legs, this is how things really are.
But there's a but.
A big but. He realizes if we always saw like this, maybe we'd never want to do anything else. Just look. Just be the divine non-self of the flower, the chair. That would be enough.
But what about people, relationships, practical stuff?
Exactly. He keeps asking, what would become of human relationships? How do you square this timeless bliss of pure perception with, doing the dishes, paying bills, relating to others in time? We must be able to see these trousers as infinitely important, he says, and human beings as still more infinitely important.
But could he do it in that state?
It seemed impossible. Being absorbed in the glory of things left no room for ordinary human concerns, especially other people. because people are egos, right? And he was at that moment this non-self.
Perceiving and being the non-self of objects.
So the whole world of egos, his own former self, his wife, his friend who was there, it all seemed not bad, just incredibly unimportant. Time, morals, practicalities, self-assertion, it all belonged to a different world he wasn't in.
He even avoided eye contact.
Deliberately. Didn't want to be too aware of them.
Wow. And then he's shown that Cézanne self-portrait.
Yeah, a big color reproduction.
Yeah.
And the head instantly pops into 3D, becomes this little gnome-like man looking out, and Huxley just starts laughing.
Laughing. Why?
He keeps saying, what pretension? Who does he think he is?
At Cézanne.
At Cézanne, but also at everyone, at the whole human race. Who do they all think they are? It's that massive gap between the ego world and the egoless perception he was experiencing.
That contrast really highlights the shift, which leads him to think about Vermeer, doesn't it?
Yes, Vermeer and the partially cleansed doors of perception. He sees Vermeer's art as managing to show the essential not self in things, and also in people when they're quiet, still, minds tranquil.
The greatest painter of human still lifes, he calls him.
Yeah. He compares them to others, too, like the Lenain brothers in France, who painted similar human still lifes with this intense clarity, almost monochrome, or even VR, capturing that fundamental reality, the Dharma body, in ordinary middle-class rooms.
But that core question remains. How do you live with this purified perception and deal with life, with people?
It brings up that ancient debate, right? Active versus contemplative life. Felt incredibly relevant to him after that experience.
He admits he didn't really get contemplation before, but now he's experienced its peak, though maybe not its fullness. Because in its fullness, the path of Mary, contemplation, should include and elevate Martha's path, action.
But Mescaline.
Mescaline opens Mary's path wide open, but slams the door on Martha. It gives you contemplation, but it's a kind that's totally incompatible with action or even the will to act.
He says in the gaps between the revelations, the user feels like, yeah, everything's perfect in one sense, but fundamentally wrong in another.
It's the classic quietist dilemma, isn't it? Or the dilemma of the landscape painter versus, say, a history painter. Mescaline doesn't solve it, it just throws it into sharp relief.
The real solution, he thinks, is for those prepared to live with a correct understanding, right behavior, constant calm focus. He contrasts the quietist with the active contemplative, the saint who helps others.
And the arhat, trying to escape the world, versus the bodhisattva who sees the ultimate and the everyday as one and acts with compassion.
In art, it's Vermeer versus the universal scope of Rembrandt. Huge figures, massive achievements. For Huxley, that morning, he just felt grateful for seeing the problem and its potential solution more clearly than ever.
So what about the potential? Could someone with purified perception actually function in the world?
Huxley thinks maybe yes. They might not need to withdraw. They could engage with practical stuff, just content, seeing, and being part of the divine order.
Because if you feel like you own the universe, if everything seems infinite and holy, what's the motivation for greed, ego trips, power games, harmful stuff?
Exactly. He argues a contemplative person is unlikely to be actively harmful. They don't usually push intolerance or start fights or exploit people.
And beyond just not being harmful.
They can bring back reports from that other reality, the transcendent realm. And the really deep contemplatives. They can act as channels, letting beneficial influence flow from that realm into ours.
Meanwhile, back in the experiment, the researcher asks him to look inward again, close his eyes.
Yeah, turn attention from Cézanne to his inner world. And this time, it's pretty underwhelming.
Really? After all the external wonders?
Totally. His visual field is just filled with brightly colored, shifting shapes, but they look cheap, like plastic or enamel tin.
Vulgar, trivial, like things from a dime store, he says. And it all feels confined, narrow, like I'm in the hold of a ship, he says. A cheap ship.
Ouch.
And he realizes this cheap ship, this stuff, it's somehow connected to human vanity, to the Cézanne portrait, to a posed photo he saw. This tacky inner world is his personal self, his contribution to the universe.
A lesson learned, maybe, but not a pleasant one at that moment.
No, he regrets it happened then. Because usually, he says, mescaline users find an inner world just as real, infinite, and sacred as the transfigured outer world. His experience was different.
He could see things with eyes closed, but not that profound inner landscape.
What he saw inside wasn't the essence of reality and images, but his own mind. Not being, but symbols. An ordinary substitute.
He reflects then that most people do become visionaries on mescaline. And some people just are visionaries all the time. like the poet-artist Blake.
He thinks that Blake type is actually quite common.
What made Blake unique wasn't that he saw visions, cherubs, mythological scenes, but his incredible ability to capture and represent even a fraction of that experience in words or art.
So the untalented visionary might see just as much, just can't express it.
That's the idea, an inner reality just as objective.
He then shifts focus a bit, thinking about landscape painting, how it developed much later as a major art form compared to figure painting.
Right. 1,000 years ago in China, 600 in Japan, only 300 in Europe. And in the East, there was a conscious connection between landscape art and religious ideas.
Taoist naturalism, Buddhist transcendentalism, seeing the ultimate reality in nature.
Whereas in the West, landscape was mostly secular. Even when it felt mystical, the artist often denied it.
Like Seurat, insisting he just applied the system.
Exactly. Or Constable. When Blake saw his sketch and called it inspiration, Constable just grumbled, "I meant it to be drawing."
Though Huxley says Blake was right too, it was inspiration. Constable had seen the pine trees as identical to the ultimate reality.
But now, Huxley observes, contemporary poets have turned away from both Wordsworth's nature mysticism and Blake's inner visions. They're exploring the personal subconscious, abstract concepts.
And painters did something similar. Abandoned landscape.
Yep. And they didn't turn back to that archetypal world of myth and religion either. They retreated into the personal subconscious, which he links back to.
His own vision. The cheap tin trinkets.
Exactly. And what he sees in galleries showing modern non-representational art.
Interesting critique. Then someone puts on music.
Yeah, a record. He enjoys it, but it doesn't hit him like the visual stuff did.
Right.
He wonders if a musician would have auditory revelations instead.
But the music still helps him understand things.
Significantly, yeah. He listens to Bach and a late medieval piece. He says the medieval stuff, being modal, sounds almost like Schoenberg, quite fragmented. But even in the fragmentation, he feels each part is ordered, representing a higher order.
So order prevails even in disintegration.
That's the feeling. The totality is present even in the fragments, maybe even more clearly because you're not fooled by a superficial human order. You have to rely on your direct perception of the ultimate order.
So disintegration has advantages, but also dangers.
Big dangers.
Yeah.
What if you can't get back from the chaos?
Yeah. After the music, they decide to go outside.
Walk in the garden. Huxley is willing. And even though his body feels totally separate from his mind,
He can still move normally.
gets up, walks out, no problem. He notes how weird it feels that I isn't the same as his limbs, torso, head. But he gets used to it quickly. The body just seems to know what to do.
Like it runs on autopilot anyway most of the time.
He reflects on that. The
Yeah.
conscious ego just formulates wishes, right? The body carries them out using forces the ego barely understands. And when the ego tries too hard, worries, micromanages.
It just messes things up. Causes illness even.
But in his altered state, consciousness wasn't the ego. It was separate. And the body's own intelligence was separate too. The usual worried boss mind had happily stepped aside for a bit.
That's quite a feeling of release, I imagine, so back inside.
His attention gets grabbed by the garden furniture again. Sunlight, sharp shadows. He stares at a wicker chair.
Not as a chair this time.
No, as these incredibly intense bright blue openings separated by deep purple spaces, like gaps in reality.
Wow.
And for ages, he just looks. Doesn't know what it is, doesn't want to know. Perception completely swamps the concept. He's just absorbed in seeing, astonished by it.
The labels, chair, slats, sun, shadow, they're irrelevant. Just add-ons.
Totally, the pure experience is those blue openings. And it's wonderfully strange, but also kind of frightening.
Frightening. How so?
He gets this sudden flash of understanding maybe this is how someone in psychosis feels. Schizophrenia has its paradises too, he realizes. He remembers a story about someone whose wife, early in her illness, was just mesmerized by the beauty of the patterns in his tweed jacket, ignoring everything else.
But those moments didn't last for her.
Sadly, no. The bliss faded, leaving only distress.
So, faced with this chair, that seems like the last judgment.
He feels panic rising. The experience is intensifying, moving towards more beauty, more meaning, but it's becoming too much.
Too much reality.
Yeah. The fear, looking back, was of being overwhelmed, obliterated by a reality too big for a mind used to symbols. He points out religious writings are full of this, the pain and terror when people confront the mysterium tremendum, the awesome mystery of existence.
The incompatibility between our little egos and the infinite divine.
That's the theological explanation. Divine light as a consuming fire for the unready soul. He mentions William Law.
And the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Same idea. The soul recoils from the pure light of the void, flees back to the familiar darkness of selfhood. Anything's better than the searing brilliance of limitless reality.
So the person with psychosis
Isn't just unready, they're also unwell.
Yeah.
They can't escape back into the ordinary world of common sense. They're stuck permanently perceiving this overwhelming reality they can't handle.
And that constant exposure, combined with fear, makes them interpret the strangeness as malevolent, leading to desperate reactions.
That's Huxley's hypothesis. It's a chilling thought.
It really is. So this deep human need for self-transcendence, where do people find it? Ideally, religion.
Ideally, yes, some form of genuine spiritual practice, but in reality, it seems unlikely for everyone. Traditional piety isn't enough for many. He mentions Chesterton, who liked both church and pubs.
Right. Churches mostly accept alcohol, but they don't make it sacred, do they?
No. The religious drinker keeps their faith and their booze in separate boxes. Maybe he has to. Sobriety is usually central to Christian practice. You can't really mix liturgical rites with being tipsy.
Doesn't hurt the drinks industry, but leaves a gap for people seeking deeper experience within the church.
Exactly. They desire self-transcendence, want to find it there, but remain thirsty. So they turn to alcohol for temporary escape. Church becomes habit, God a word. The only religious feeling is the buzz after a few drinks.
So traditional Christianity and alcohol, not a great mix, but Christianity and mescaline.
Much more compatible, he argues. Look at the Native American church.
Using peyote sacramentally.
Right. They see the peyote cactus as a divine gift, its effects as the Holy Spirit working. They've integrated it into a practice blending indigenous ways with Christian beliefs. It became a powerful symbol of spiritual independence for them.
Combining resistance to oppression with that universal urge for self-transcendence, all within a coherent framework.
Exactly. It's a fascinating example of adaptation.
Huxley then takes aim at our education system, doesn't he?
Oh yeah. Too much focus on words, neglecting direct experience of reality. Psychologists, philosophers talk about well-being, but how many academics or clergy really investigate these less conventional paths where truth might lie?
He points to mescaline research itself. People described profound experiences decades earlier, but who in the establishment, philosophers, theologians, educators, bothered to try that door in the wall?
Almost nobody. In a word-obsessed world, even smart people struggle to focus on anything but words and concepts. Academia rewards analyzing texts, who said what when. Verbal skills are prized.
While nonverbal understanding, the art of directly perceiving reality, largely ignored.
Pretty much. It doesn't fit the curriculum. It's seen as suspect, maybe flaky. Rational thinkers distrust non-rational facts. Intellectuals feel direct perception is somehow beneath them.
He quotes Blake again about the vainglory of systematic reasoning.
Right. Reasoning is essential, obviously. But we also need direct perception of inner and outer worlds. This given reality is way beyond our intellect, but we can experience it.
True understanding means being aware of that total reality while still being able to think logically and act practically.
That's the goal. Realizing we're already where we need to be, we just complicate it.
So in a better system, intellectuals, Blake's angels, would be encouraged to take occasional trips through that chemical door in the wall.
To gain wisdom and humility, yeah. He brings up Thomas Aquinas.
The great theologian.
Near the end of his life, Aquinas had some profound mystical experience, infused contemplation. After that, he refused to write any more theology, called all his previous work mere straw compared to what he'd seen.
Wow. That's a statement.
Now, Huxley isn't saying everyone should ditch their work, but Aquinas had earned the right to turn from symbols to substance.
And those who do peek through that door, they come back changed.
Wiser, less arrogant, happier, humbler, better able to grasp the gap between words and reality. That's the hope.
Okay, so that's doors of perception. Now, heaven and hell builds on this, right? It's like a sequel.
Exactly. Reflecting more on what these experiences mean for understanding other minds, other perceptions. He talks about these improbable mental creatures living in the remoter regions of the mind.
It's hard to talk about this stuff without using metaphors, isn't it? Geography, zoology.
He acknowledges that.
Yeah.
Trying to convey the sheer otherness, the autonomy of these mental landscapes and their inhabitants, the old world of personal consciousness versus the antipodes of the mind.
And hypnosis is another way in, to these antipodes where strange psychological marsupials live.
That's how he puts it. Hypnosis can transport people there, even if we don't fully get how it works.
And back to mescaline's effects. He thinks it interferes with brain enzymes, reduces its efficiency as a focusing tool for survival.
Yeah, that reducing valve idea again. Less biological efficiency might let in mental events usually excluded because they have no survival value, like aesthetic or spiritual stuff.
And similar things can happen through illness, fatigue, fasting, sensory deprivation.
All potential doorways, yeah. Which leads him to think about asceticism.
Why people practice it, not just for atonement.
Dual motivation, he suggests. Atonement, yes. But also this deep desire to visit those antipodes of the mind. Fasting, isolation. These were known ways to trigger visions. Think Milarepa, the Desert Hermit, St. Anthony's Temptations.
But it's not always paradise they find, is it?
No. Asceticism can open the door to heaven, but potentially to regions of hell too.
So what are the common features when people do have these visionary experiences?
Number one, light. Everything is intensely lit, seems to shine from within, and colors are way beyond normal, super intense with an ability to see incredibly subtle shades.
Very different from ordinary dreams, which are often gray or patchy color.
Exactly. These induced or spontaneous visions are consistently preternaturally bright.
And the things seen, are they symbolic?
Some images, closer to us in the collective unconscious, might be symbolic archetypes. But further out, in the true antipodes, the inhabitants seem non-symbolic. They just are. But both types are vividly colored.
Why so intense? Partly freedom from language.
That's his theory. Ordinary perception gets dulled, simplified by words and concepts. In these visionary states, you're seeing things fresh, raw, unverbalized. The color shines brilliantly because it's just natural, unfiltered.
It feels like revelation, not imagination.
Yes. The poet A.E. made that distinction reflections of personality versus images from the divine imagination. Huxley stresses we should often say, I was shown, instead of, I imagine.
Because it feels totally unfamiliar, no personal memories, no faces you know.
Exactly. You're exploring territory beyond your normal awareness. He shares that amazing story of his friend on the beach.
Seeing the beauty in every grain of sand.
Lit from within. The whole world just transformed from an unforgettable glimpse of the inherent wonder in everything. Poets and mystics describe similar things.
And this light and color comes with meaning.
Intense meaning. The self-luminous objects possess meaning, as intense as their color. Further out in the antipodes, meaning is being. Things just are, profoundly. Closer in, meaning might relate to human experience, but further out, it's about the universe's non-human otherness, the sheer isness.
Okay, so light, color, meaning. Are there typical objects or scenes?
Yes, common patterns emerge. Often starts with vivid, moving geometric shapes.
Like a kaleidoscope?
Kind of. Then these pure forms become concrete things, patterned carpets, intricate sculptures, mosaics. Then maybe vast, complex buildings appear in constantly shifting, ever-richer landscapes.
Mythical figures.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. Heroic figures like Blake's Seraphim, fabulous beasts. But it always feels utterly new, rarely triggers personal memories. You feel like you're seeing a new creation, not remembering or inventing.
He details Weir Mitchell's peyote visions too, doesn't he?
Yeah, a classic account. Started with star-like points like stained glass fragments, then floating filaments of color, countless points of white light, zigzag lines turned into huge, bright clouds.
Then buildings.
An elaborate Gothic tower, covered in what looked like enormous jewels, shining with inner light. Then mountains, cliffs, a stone bird's claw, endless unfolding fabrics, more jewels.
And it ended with
green and purple waves breaking on a beach, lit by matching light. A whole journey.
So each experience is unique, but they belong to the same species.
That's how he sees it. Landscapes, architecture, jewels, brilliant patterns. That's the stuff of the antipodes. Always characterized by that preternatural light, color, and meaning. Why? We don't really know.
And how does this compare to myths and religions, their descriptions of other worlds?
The similarities are striking. Paradises, fairylands, heavens. They almost always feature extraordinary light, intense colors, profound meaning, and landscapes of indescribable beauty, just like the visionary experiences.
He gives examples. Utopia's rivers of gold.
Hindu accounts of pearl-lined rivers, golden trees with fragrant, jewel-like fruit. The Hindu realm Uttarakuru dripping with precious stones, just like mescaline visions. It's a near-universal theme. Paradise is full of jewels or jewel-like things.
Ezekiel's Garden of Eden.
Covered in precious stones, stones of fire. Buddhist pure lands with silver and gold walls, jewel-lined lakes, radiant lotuses.
Which brings him to ask, Why are humans so obsessed with jewels?
Yeah, why spend so much effort on shiny pebbles? From a practical view, it's weird, but visionary experience makes sense of it.
Because in visions, you see these radiant, jewel-like objects.
Exactly. Stones of fire, transparent fruit, real precious stones are the closest earthly things to them. So wanting jewels might be an unconscious recognition of their connection to that luminous other world.
Acquiring them feels like acquiring a piece of that world, validated by its existence there.
Plausible, right. Explains the passion, the belief in their magical virtues. It starts in the psyche, manifests on earth, gets reflected in theology. Socrates' description of the Phaedo of an ideal world where stones shine brighter and ours are just fragments, it fits perfectly.
And gardens. God first made a garden.
Deep psychological truth, Huxley says. Horticulture partly originates in the other world. Offering flowers is like giving back things that came from paradise.
It's a two-way street. Jewels come from the vision, but contemplating jewels can take you back there.
Yes. Looking at jewels can transport you maybe to that platonic other earth where every pebble is precious. Same effect possible with shiny glass, metalwork, candles in the dark, bright images, flowers, feathers, even certain landscapes.
Basically, anything that resembles the bright, meaningful stuff of the antipodes can trigger a partial vision.
That's the idea. Think about hypnosis often induced by staring at a bright object. Does it lead to inner visions, a transfigured outer world?
Is that just eye strain, though? Or psychology forced concentration causing dissociation?
Or, Huxley suggests a third option. The bright object reminds our unconscious of what it likes in the antipodes. These hints of the other world are so fascinating we shift attention and consciously see what's always there, unconsciously.
Which explains why religious art everywhere uses these materials.
Gold shrines, chryselephantine statues, jeweled icons, bright altars. Across cultures, across time. Goldsmithing feels intrinsically supernatural, central to mysteries linked to light. Ezekiel's stones of fire or flame as a living jewel, especially in darkness. Temples as twilight caves where candles light treasures, hinting at another world.
Medieval stained glass. Hugely valuable then.
Absolutely. People gave fortunes for it, but then it changed. 14th century, it became paler, less transporting. 15th century, it imitated painting, lost its visionary power.
And the Reformation.
Protestants disapproved of visions, focused on the Bible, wanted clear glass to read by. The Counter-Reformation was split, valuing both. But the result was less visionary glass overall.
So pure, brilliant color is the essence of visionary beauty specifically.
Yes. Think brightly painted Greek temples, medieval statues. We prefer au naturel now, maybe because we're saturated with bright pigments from industry. They've lost their transporting power through overfamiliarity.
The contrast was stronger before. The dark medieval world versus the brilliant antipodes in the mind.
Exactly. Leading to this passionate hunger for brilliance in churches, courts. Now we have bright colors everywhere. Maybe they mean less.
Even artificial light has lost its magic, like neon signs.
50 years before he wrote, electric signs in foggy London seemed like rare jewels. Now neon is everywhere. The magic's gone. Except maybe spotlights transforming landmarks at night, they can still feel visionary, transporting.
What about light and shadow in painting? Chiaroscuro.
That developed later, 16th, 17th centuries, brought darkness into the figures, creating drama. Probably transporting when new often seems just theatrical now.
But not always. Rembrandt.
Ah, Rembrandt is different. His light has the intensity, the meaning of the antipodes. His darkness is rich, full of potential. His subjects are often real life or Bible stories, but sometimes clearly archetypal, like his philosopher in meditation, representing the human mind itself.
He shows how perception can be revelation, reality shining through appearance.
Beautifully put, yes. He also notes how heroic figures in religious art are often static still.
Egyptian gods, Byzantine Madonnas, Buddhas.
Our law is being busy. Maybe theirs is doing nothing. Forcing them into our dramas weakens the visionary truth. Cherubs are most transporting when just being cherubs. That profound stillness gives great religious art its numinous quality, its power to transport. Static art isn't always better, but a static heroic figure often hits harder, visionarily speaking.
Why do landscapes feature in visionary literature sometimes, but not always in painting of the same era?
Maybe words were enough. Blake saw visionary scenery articulated beyond all that mortal and perishing nature can produce. Wordsworth felt that deep connection. People have always found satisfaction in nature's otherness.
Even in history, with different worldviews.
Yeah, he suggests medieval folks found equivalents for our modern experiences: nature appreciation, mystical connection, Dionysian release maybe in Saturnalian orgies or mystical states. Visionary arts helped recapture those feelings.
So, despite weird old beliefs, our ancestors stayed relatively sane by escaping into nonverbal worlds now and then. Instinct, visions, spirit.
Plausible idea. And nature itself can be transporting. A wet rock, a twisted pine. They remind us of the other world's strangeness. Looking closely at leaves reveals patterns like visionary geometries.
Chinese landscape painting, with its inhuman perspective, vastness.
Transports the mind, yeah. Like a nearsighted artist or a lover in grace personality dissolves. Focusing on nearby things diminishes human ego, highlights the supernatural beauty of vain things seen in isolation. Patterns from nature rose, lotus become transporting reminders of the other world's living geometries.
But visionary experience isn't all bliss, is it? There's hell, too.
Definitely. And visionary hell also has preternatural light and meaning, but it's terrifying meaning, and the light is smoky or visible darkness.
Like the schizophrenic's world, sometimes paradise, sometimes terrifying illumination.
Yes. And the punishments in hell visions often involve pressure, constriction. Dante's sinners buried in mud, frozen in ice, crushed by rocks. These echo real pains felt by schizophrenics or people having bad trips.
Can these negative visions have physical causes?
Could be. Mescaline plus a bad liver, maybe. Or purely psychological fear and anger blocking heaven, opening hell instead, which links to theology. Salvation by faith. Virtue alone isn't enough to guarantee a blessed vision. You need grace, trust.
What about after death? After glimpsing reality, heaven, hell, what happens?
Most souls, Huxley speculates based on various traditions, might return to a more comfortable mental place, like earthly life but different. Only a tiny few achieve immediate union with the divine ground, or stay in eternal bliss, or get trapped in horror.
The majority end up in a realm like Swedenborg or mediums describe, from where progress is possible.
That's the idea. He also touches on physiological ways to induce visions, prolonged chanting.
Increases CO2 in the blood, he suggests, makes the brain's reducing valve less efficient. Similar milder effects. Those vain repetitions in magic and religion might have a psychochemical purpose?
Pascal's "the heart has its reasons, but maybe the lungs, blood, enzymes have even more fundamental reasons."
Huh. Yeah. The path to the superconscious runs through the subconscious, and maybe a path to the subconscious runs through cell chemistry.
But tons of questions remain unanswered, right?
Oh, loads. Why are these experiences so vivid, so memorable? Could we stimulate specific visions with electrodes? What exactly happens neurologically when a vision occurs and when it ends? We just don't know. And why fewer visionaries and mystics reported in the West now? Two main reasons, he suspects. Philosophical. Our worldview doesn't really have space for valid transcendental experience. And chemical. Our internal environment has changed. We just distrust claims of transcendence now. How is our ancestors' chemical environment different?
Think diet. Seasonal vitamin deficiencies were common: scurvy, pellagra, lack of fresh food in winter.
And vitamin deficiencies hit the nervous system, affecting mental state even before obvious physical signs?
Exactly. Undernourishment could cause anxiety, depression, hypochondria, and maybe lower the brain's reducing valve efficiency, making visions more likely.
So those early visionaries, often seeing terrifying figures, the devil, maybe linked to poor diet and a culture saturated with belief in Satan?
Plausible. Plus, the mental anguish intensified by fears of damnation. Yet despite all that, spiritually inclined ascetics still found paradise, glimpsed the divine one. The value of those glimpses outweighed the hardships.
What about fasting? Self-flagellation?
Medieval winters, Lent, prolonged fasting, voluntary or not, chemically priming people for religious fervor. Easter, a time of high religious excitement and low vitamin intake, perfect storm for ecstasies, visions.
And whipping oneself.
Releases histamine, adrenaline. Toxic stuff from infected wounds could also affect brain chemistry, further reducing the valve's efficiency, creating a physiological state ripe for psychic phenomena, visions, mystical experience.
So even spiritual experiences are chemically conditioned?
Ultimately, yes. Contemplatives throughout history intuitively modify the chemistry: fasting, whipping, sleep deprivation, weird postures, and breathing exercises. Now we understand how to chemically tweak the reducing valve, hopefully without severe harm.
He suggests aspiring mystics could use technical help. Pharmacologists, biochemists collaborating with artists, visionaries.
A bold idea. Bridge the gap between science and direct experience.
He also notes how entertainment uses visionary effects. More than fine art now, maybe.
Fireworks, pageants, theater spectacles, essentially visionary arts, even if temporary. Their quality depends on the tech of the time. Pyrotechnics evolved from signals to siege weapons to pure spectacle.
Theater has two sides, human drama and the visionary spectacle.
Separate arts, he argues. Spectacle is like ceremony without the politics or religion.
Ben Jonson complained about carpentry being the soul of the mass.
Yeah, highlighting how the visual trumped the verbal in that visionary form. But early masks were limited by candlelight, couldn't be truly transporting.
Until better lighting came along, 19th century.
Carbide light, reflectors, electricity. Suddenly, the mask's visionary potential was realized. Victorian pantomimes, fairies, light transfiguring the stage, transporting audiences, still happens in modern shows with powerful lighting. Visionary art compensating for purely human drama.
What about photography and lighting now?
Early color photos were just recording raw material. But color film, used well, could externalize abstract art's intensity. And powerful lighting gives sculpture new visionary possibilities. Fuseli got ideas studying statues by sunset or lightning.
Now we can light statues however we want, revealing new things.
Exactly. Visiting the Louvre at night, seeing sculptures lit dramatically. Totally different experience. The past is always being rediscovered. Modern lighting lets us go further.
Greek statues lit artificially, photographed in close-up fragments.
Totally unlike past perceptions. Subverts the classical ideal of rational order. You can use light in photography to declassicize classical art, make it dramatic, highlight specific bits out of context.
He mentions Georges de Latour, too.
Yes, those candlelit paintings. Common scenes, but imbued with profound stillness, impersonal presence. Are they religious? Secular. The ambiguity suggests a deeper divinity present everywhere.
And looking at nature differently.
Middle distance, it's familiar. Close up, far away, odd angle. It reveals its unsettling strangeness, its wonder. Chinese and Japanese art show this close-ups uniting samsara and nirvana.
Zen artists isolating things on blank backgrounds.
To emphasize their absolute thing in itself-ness. Western artists do it too, isolating sacred figures, portraits, even distant landscapes like Rembrandt's Mill or Van Gogh's cypresses. Goya's silhouettes derive magic from isolation, intrinsic significance.
Isolation plus proximity.
You give an example.
Okay.
17th century Japanese painting of a shrike on a bare branch, emerging from the void, intensely real, free, like Hardy's thrush, but without the moralizing, just pure being.
But not all altered states are positive. Some mental illness involves a gray world.
Yeah, many schizophrenics inhabit this ghostly, unreal world. A limbo, not heaven or hell, feels like the ancient underworld Sheol, Hades. Loss of contact, purposelessness, solitude, silence. This state can apparently be induced by small doses of adrenaline derivatives.
So our understanding of these states of eschatology has progressed.
Genuine progress, he thinks. Theologically. From Hades to paradise.
Chemically.
From adrenalutine to mescaline LSD. Psychologically. From catatonian reality to heightened reality mystical experience.
Are there negative visionaries too?
He points to Jericho. Obsessively realistic, but depicting a world magically transfigured for the worse. Corpses, demons. The raft of the Medusa shows the universe as a dissection room. He saw the world as terrifying visionary apocalypses painted in meticulous detail.
And Carlyle's description in Sartor Resartus.
A vivid account of a depressive, partly schizophrenic state. People as mere figures, the universe a dead machine. Constant vague fear despite hopelessness.
Parallels between these psychotic states and visionary ones.
René, the schizophrenic patient, and Carlyle describe similar experiences of infinity, but for Carlyle, it's negatively significant, making everything meaningless, unreal.
Okay, bringing us towards the end, there's the postscript by Siddhartha Ribeiro. It mentions Huxley's death.
Yeah, his planned death, requesting intramuscular LSD, a final affirmation of the promise he saw in psychedelics.
And Huxley's vision for the future.
A hyper-technological utopia, creativity flourishing, leisure time for arts and science, helped along by non-addictive serotonergic substances and theogens.
These altered states have ancient roots, though.
Way back. Pre-language, pre-bicameral mind even. Then came accumulation, then greed. Now we're in this internet age, psychedelic consciousness merging with uncertain identity, fluid reality, and memory.
Potential for dystopia. Drugs as escapism, like Philip K. Dick worried.
That's one possibility. Or they could be keys alongside meditation, breath work, supported by neuroscience, opening a different path.
Right. So let's try and wrap this all up, a summary of this deep dive.
Okay. We've really journeyed through Huxley's exploration of perception, haven't we? The potential in altered states, those intriguing biochemical links, the whole cultural history of visions in art and religion.
And how he connects his own very personal experiences to these huge philosophical and psychological questions.
And hopefully, for you listening, this has sparked some of those aha moments, giving you a richer sense of how we perceive things without being totally overwhelming. It's deep stuff.
Absolutely. So the final thought to leave you with, considering everything Huxley explored and that postscript about constructed reality, the potential of these substances and practices, what might it actually mean for you to intentionally, perhaps gently, explore the boundaries of your own doors of perception?
Could digging into these ideas further offer genuinely new ways of seeing the world and your own place in it? Something to mull over?
Definitely something to think about until our next deep dive.